Good morning or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. So we do have people joining us from everywhere. Welcome to SaaStr Money. Welcome to our next session. Really excited for this session to kick off. So just going to give everyone another couple seconds to filter in and get themselves settled. Again, welcome to SaaStr Money, everybody. I'm excited to introduce Ashley. She's the global head of sales at Square. She's going to be talking about moving up market and serving multiple customer segments at the same time. Super excited for this session. Before I pass it over to Ashley, just a couple housekeeping reminders for everybody here. This session is 50 minutes, 50. So we have plenty of time for questions. Ashley is going to be saving a lot of time at the end. So make sure you drop your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. The session is being recorded. So recordings and slides will be available post-event. Make sure you follow us and subscribe to SaaStr, SlideShare, and YouTube. And then lastly, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So drop in where you're tuning in from in the chat. Ashley, thanks so much. Again, I'm going to pass it over to you to take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. All right, I'm coming through fine. That's great. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining today at SaaStr. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to meeting some new people through this forum. I'm Ashley Grech. I'm the global head of sales at Square, which is a commerce platform that serves businesses, employees of those businesses, and individual consumers. I've been at Square for 4 years now, and the product has evolved significantly in that time frame alone. Literally every day, there's something new. We're expanding our product market fit to more and more industries each year, as well as customer size segments. So if you can just imagine that, it's multivariate growth. It often feels like we're trying to do what multiple companies are trying to do simultaneously. So it's been an adventure, but there's a lot to share here, both about the foundations of a SaaS product that makes that possible, that will help your company grow and scale over time if that's what you want, and some learnings along the way that have been critical to Square's success over the years. So without further ado, and on that theme, I'll be walking us through a quick introduction of Square's story, which is just a setting for our journey to grow and serve more customer segments over time. Then I'll share some of Square's foundational approaches and that helped us expand our customer base dramatically. But there are plenty of learnings along the way, and I will share our advice and lessons learned, as well as some best practices. And then I will leave plenty of time for questions. Sounds good? Good, thank you. All right, let's start at the start. Square was started in what felt like just impossible times, and against some incredible odds. It was in the shadow of the financial crisis, and the theme and the tone of like too big to fail, like the idea of financial services infrastructure loomed large. And the story goes that Jim McKelvey, one of our co-founders, was a glass artist. And he missed out on a $2,000 sale because he couldn't accept a credit card payment for his artwork. And he didn't want this to happen to anybody else. And that was ultimately the reason that Jim McKelvey and Jack Dorsey partnered together to build a simple digital card reader that allowed their iPhones to accept credit card payments. And so thus the idea of commerce for every business taken anywhere was born, right? Like that's our central heart and the reason why we're here to begin with. So as our customers grew, we needed to build, so we brought on these customers anywhere, everywhere, right? But as these customers grew, we needed to build specific functions to meet their changing needs. The needs of a micro merchant, like a seller in a farmer's market, differs pretty greatly from that of a food truck or a multi-location retailer or an NFL stadium, right? Those are dramatically different needs and use cases. So you fast forward to today, Square's grown on what I like to think of as three different axes: product diversity, customer type, and customer size and complexity. So we have now almost 36 product offerings across a general industry agnostic offerings, right? We have payments, SaaS, APIs, as well as vertical specific SaaS products. And in addition, we've expanded from our micro merchant roots to serve SMBs. We serve mid-market companies as well as enterprise customers today. And so what started with a little white reader is now a really broad set of SaaS payments, SaaS and payments products across multiple verticals and size. So now we get into the foundation of like, how do we think about product? What allowed us to do that? We use the Square follows the jobs to be done framework, which is an idea that customers hire your product based on a need or a job they need to get done. And that sounds kind of simple, but this actually helps you think about your product not as a transaction, but it helps uncover the ability to really understand the underlying need behind a purchasing decision. So customers will often say that they want something on the surface. Anyone that's done like customer interviews will say that they want something, but really they might be solving for something else. I'll give you an example from the late Professor Clayton Christensen's work on jobs to be done. So that work cites McDonald's Corp. Trying to determine how to sell more milkshakes. I like this example, it's kind of fun, right? So McDonald's tried different flavors, pricing promotions, and it really just didn't move the needle all that much. And so they were like, who doesn't want to try a whatever strawberry shamrock milkshake? Like that, how can that be? But when they dug deeper, that's when they discovered what these milkshakes were really being hired for. So they first discovered that most milkshakes were being sold before 9 a.m., if you can imagine that. Like I personally can't imagine drinking a milkshake at 9 a.m., but so it was. So researchers were puzzled by this, and they spoke to the buyers and discovered that these buyers were buying the milkshakes to sip. They were coming through the drive-through and they were sipping it on their way to work for breakfast. And so further interviews uncovered that as far as driving while eating goes, a bagel and cream cheese was fine. It's delicious, but messy. So you can eat it with your hands, but it's kind of messy and it's filling. A banana, also, you can eat it with your hands. It's quick and easy, not particularly messy, but not filling, and definitely not filling enough to get you through till lunchtime. But a milkshake was filling, not messy, and had to be consumed slowly over the commute time because of how thick it is. And so while a milkshake as a product is desserty, creamy, and delicious, and I say desserty because I think we think of it as a dessert. The most in-demand job for it, the job to be done, was not dessert. The job was a relief from hunger and boredom during a commute hour. So I promise I won't talk about milkshakes anymore, but now turn that to like fintech or a SaaS example. Banking is a product. It's not a job. It's just the product. So the job that a customer is hiring for may be that they want to improve availability of funds or immediate access to funds, or that they want to save funds seamlessly without really thinking about it. So it's important to use the foundation of what the products are and what the jobs are as you're thinking about your additional growth levers for your own company. So how do we apply jobs to be done to your own offerings? I ask you, before I talked about Square's original DNA of ease of commerce for everyone, anywhere. That's what the very first product was built off of. Very first. But that same DNA if you sort of squint, you can see it in every offering beyond that. And so I ask you to challenge yourself as you're thinking about your own growth plans, like to really identify what your core product is, what it stands for, and what it seeks to solve for. And that's your DNA of your product and your offering, right? And it should be just super powerful, applicable to the broadest audience. Like, what is the core DNA there? And I'm sure that's how the current iteration of your product was created, right? To solve a need. But if you're thinking about trying to expand or broaden your customer base, you should begin to assess whether or not your current offering can serve the jobs to be done of a different segment, different size segment, or a different industry. And hopefully that is true. I'll give you another financial services example of a single product that solves different jobs to be done in a different segment or industry, right? Banking, we talked about before. Banking as a product is most often thought of as like a transaction account or a savings account, right? So checking and savings. And for a sole proprietor business, their financial services job to be done may be related to just immediate access to their earned income. So in other words, cash flow, right? They do a job, they receive payment for it, and they immediately can spend those dollars. For a small and medium-sized business, this may evolve into the need for capital. Like, what does banking mean to them? It means access to capital, or financing for growth plans, or buying new equipment. And for a medium-sized business, a banking job to be done may be about funds control. So money movement, money tracking across multiple store locations, or from multiple sources. So you can start to see that the same product, without much change, has relevant jobs to be done for multiple size segments. So if you have the right product structure and you have a strong focus on jobs at the core of it, you can actually maximize the total number of jobs served by your single product. And I know I'm really nerding out on this jobs to be done framework, but like it is the lifeblood of how I believe how you can expand dramatically if you can just think about like, what is my audience and what do they care about, right? So I'll talk a little bit about supporting multiple customer segments and expanding your servable market. So now that you've thought about what your core product DNA is and how you'd like to expand to new customer segments, we can talk about how to go about serving multiple customer segments at the same time. So I'll start with product and then move to go to market. On the product side, as I mentioned before, start by understanding the jobs to be done for your new segments or the new customer base that you're looking to tap into. And so here are some questions, that you might ask. What does this new segment need? What needs to change about your product experience in order to serve this larger customer or this new industry? And then once you've thought about that, you can really create intentionality of targeting. So now you can determine what are the adjacent markets that you can feasibly sell to or build for. Ideally, you're able to sell to the broadest addressable market with the least amount of additional development work. That's the ideal, right? That's the dream for all of us. But if you want to go big, then go big, right? just do it with the full knowledge of what your new segments deeply care about without reinventing the wheel, so to speak. Then we move on to go to market. So first is really like the why and the what, and then it's the how. So on the go-to-market front, I know I'm going really back to basics here, but I want to make this as broad as possible for you all in this audience. So how I approach go-to-market is any new segment, any new country that we enter, any industry vertical, fundamentally boils down to three simple questions. One is, who are your customers? 2 is what do they care about? And 3 is how are you going to reach them? How do you reach them? So the who, the first question, should be nuanced. It's not like we serve large businesses. That's not a good enough who. It is who is the buyer of this specific product, of your product. And sales and marketing can partner to go really deep on this. So for each segment size, there are very different buyers of your product. And I think you would all know that in terms of like who's the ideal customer profile, but not just who's the ideal customer profile in terms of your end customer, but like who literally is making the decision. For example, the buyer or business of a small specialty store is probably going to be the business owner, right? A small store, the decision maker is the business owner. But a buyer of a national retail store chain may be the head of retail experience or the chief experience officer or whatever that looks like. But if you can map out the who are the buyers in each of the segments that you seek to target, then you can start to map out what do these buyers care about? What are their jobs to be done? What are they solving for? And how do they make those decisions? So that's the second question, right? Who are the buyers and what do they care about? The final question is, how do you reach them? So how do you get your message across in the channels that matter the most to these customers, to these new customers that you want to target? Continuation on the go-to-market front, structuring your team. So now that you've figured out who your customers are, what do they care about, how you're going to reach them, you structure your team that way, right? You assess whether or not you need to add experience to your team, specific knowledge sets, new or different processes to empower your team with colleagues that know your space that you're trying to move into, that they're familiar with the pain points that you're trying to solve for and can speak a lingo and reach those customers. So one thing that we think about a lot is like what can be generalist and what needs to be highly specialized. And it's an ever evolving structural question. All right. So now that I've just described what largely encompasses like expanding your customer base, which can be useful for expanding into a new industry vertical, I want to touch upon a few specific call outs about moving up market in your SaaS product offering and targeting. So assuming your product doesn't require a massive overhaul and huge changes to address larger customers, this becomes somewhat of a packaging play, if you think about it. Like it really requires close collaboration between product, marketing, and sales. But what I mean by packaging is the wrapping. So how are the features assembled together? Do you have to sort of reassemble them in different packages in order for it to be relevant to a larger customer? Are you repurposing the same product infrastructure in new combinations? And if so, how do you talk about this user experience? That's also part of the packaging and the wrapping paper, right? Do you need to brand it differently? Similarly, in terms of partnership with sales and marketing, it is critical to identify those new jobs to be done and then to work with marketing to shape the most connective messaging with this new customer base and to outline a plan to raise awareness amongst your new prospects through the channels that matter most to them. Something that is near and dear to my heart, and I think every good go-to-market effort keeps their eyes on this, is as it relates to product, is related to product collaboration. So there are two key things to remember here. Number one is, like, as I mentioned before, determine if you need to repackage or bundle the offerings that have more meaning or utility to the customers that you're trying to serve, to your new prospect base, and you'll rely on product to sort of create that packaging. Second is make sure that you have built a regular structure and cadence to collaborate between frontline teams, so your sales and marketing teams and your product teams, so that you may regularly track and communicate product feedback and insights from the front lines. Why is that second part so important? Because even with the absolute best laid plans and well thought out strategy and research and assumptions, you will learn things that you hadn't anticipated. You will learn new jobs to be done of certain customers along the way, and you will need to pivot and adjust. We've done this countless times every year, and it's really part of the fun. Like it's an adventure to learn a little bit more about something that you didn't think of. So that like voice of your customer cycle is so critical. I cannot emphasize it enough, and I cannot celebrate it enough. All right, so on the thread of powerful feedback loops as we serve larger and larger customers, here are some of the key themes that emerge from our customer base as we grow with them and as we bring on new clients. So I want to share those with you here. What are the best practices for single job SaaS providers looking to move up market, right? That was a question I was seeking to answer. Number one is we've learned that customers are looking for consolidation, ease, and a seamless integration in their technology partnerships. So while their business is growing and getting larger, they don't want complexity and fragmentation to grow with it. And that often happens. And so like the winners in this space are those that have consolidation and seamless integrations. Second key learning. We learned that customers want real advice from our sales teams and our account managers. They want advice. They don't want features. This also speaks to integrations advice and partnership advice. It's just like, I feel very strongly about that as a sales leader, and we've seen it come through every single call. And then finally, moving up market is unlocked by the power of partnerships. A strong partner ecosystem built early on, even with tangentially perceived competitors to your product, is a powerful differentiator, and it will serve you well over time. Okay, key takeaways. First, good product design approaches can be extended to good growth design and expansion design approach as well. Second is build for scale and flexibility. So future-proof your technology by making sure it's flexible and can integrate with other business critical technologies. The third is people. Create a strong people foundation. Ensure that your team has the people and the tools they need to be effective in serving new markets. So what got you here won't get you there. So balance building off of your existing go-to-market engine, and then of course intelligently designing the next team that you need in order to serve your next target customers. And finally, have a fast, clear, and regular feedback loop around the voice of your customers. So establish efficient and organized and frequent channels of communication between the front line and those building the product, because you will learn along the way. Alas, those are my cliff notes on best practices and lessons learned on my journey and on our Square journey. So thank you so much for listening in. I'd love to open it up to a more fluid conversation because I can't see the screen. So I can't see your questions as they come through. But I'd love to chat with you a little bit more about any questions you have for me today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and then see what fun conversations we can have.
Yeah, Ashley, we've got quite a number of questions rolling in for you. So excited. We've got plenty of time for you to get through them. So please have at it.
All right. Square, I'll start at the start. Mostly because there's a lot coming through and I appreciate that. I love a good chat. It says Square has so many types of customers. What are your learnings? When are you learning when vertical specific vendors win versus strong horizontal ones? That's a great question. I think that's a really good one. There are I think about this all the time as a sales leader, because it's like, how do I meet customers in a way that they really want, that they want to be met, that they have strong expectations for. Going back to the jobs to be done framework, what about those customers' jobs may be significantly different from other in like sort of more tangential industries? So everyone needs to take a payment, but how does the business operations of a specific industry look different? That's ultimately why we built our restaurants specific product, because restaurants have a very different view of like how the channels in which all the orders come in. It can be in restaurant, it can be ordered on an app, a third-party app, it can be ordered on their own app, on their own website, it can be called in. So how do you unify this like order experience? Then you have like front of house and back of house. And so you can start seeing like those jobs are different enough that a vertical specific vendor wins versus a more horizontal one. That is absolutely true. You see with other companies, for example, like Intuit probably has a very strong focus on accountants and manufacturing, because they're very clear sort of accounting rules that are based on manufacturing. Last in, last out, first in, first out. Like, what does that look like for them? And so that's how we think about it. And I imagine that's also how others have found the best practices on like, how different are these jobs to be done? How different are the business operations? I'm going to drop into the chat here as well from Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. How are you? How do you make sure the job to be done for your biggest teams don't crush all the needs of your smaller customers? That's a really good one. It's really hard. That's really hard. This is something we think about at Square all the time, because it's not that we are replacing our customer focus, it's that we're trying to expand our customer focus. And so we think a lot about like, well, what jobs are we serving really well today? And let's get those core jobs right. And that is the biggest, the broadest common denominator, right? And I think that is like, those are number one. Then you start to get into the specific jobs. And it's only until we do the first really well, then we can start moving on to the next ones. And so I think there's a prioritization of like, what's the broadest audience? What are the most important jobs? What is a non-negotiable for your customer base? And then you start thinking about like, what's nice to have, what is surprising and delighting. And obviously you're trying to really delight along the way for each of these experiences. But that's how I've seen our incredible product team navigate that. Thank you. All right. Let's see. How do you handle how do you handle marketing, messaging, and positioning one product to different markets? I'm going to speak for our marketing team here, but they do an excellent job in thinking about what are the unique jobs of each, like of manufacturers, or sorry, let's say of a healthcare provider, health and beauty, versus restaurants, versus a home and repair service provider. You'll see the same DNA show up in each of these. So speed, ease, control, flexibility, like adventure, entrepreneurship. Like you can take the same DNA and really just tweak that message across. That's honestly, I think that's the power of having the same DNA show up to serve all of your customer base. So ideally, that's what you have, is something that like really resonates with different sized customers or different industry customers. But then it's up to you to just tweak it ever so slightly. It's answering the first and second question, right? Who is this customer? Who is the buyer explicitly, and what do they care about? Are any of the other questions jumping out? There are a lot of them, and I want to be able to like focus on answering them as well as reading them. There's a funny one here from Miguel that says, how do you make sure the jobs to be done results don't end up as a Frankenstein product? I'm just imagining that. I hear you on that, Miguel. How do you make sure it doesn't wind up as Frankenstein? You ultimately try not to reinvent the wheel, and to not have sort of too many add-ons. It should be, if you have the customer's experience in mind, it's their experience that matters. And if those experiences aren't related, then you shouldn't build for it. And I feel grateful that I don't feel like that's true at all. I haven't seen it at Square, but I'm trying to imagine a case where things have gone terribly wrong and that's emerged. But if you have the customer's experience in mind completely, and you seek deeply to understand that, and that's a real danger, is like to not stay close to it, to not continue to iterate with customers along the way, then you do run the risk of a Frankenstein product for sure. One thing that I would say about that is if you're using something like the jobs to be done framework, sometimes what the ultimate solve for is not what they say they wanted. The milkshake example is a good one. It's like, I want a milkshake. And in our minds, like, do you want dessert? But what they really want is breakfast. And if they said like, well, I'm hungry, or I need something to eat one-handed, you would have given them a granola bar or a banana or a bagel. But once you start like really digging into the underlying needs, like really keeping an ear to understanding what they're trying to solve for, what their struggle is, that's what prevents you from solving for the wrong thing and hopefully cobbling together the wrong or the wrong combination of tools. I'm gonna look for some additional questions here. Do some larger customers think that Square is intuitively too SMB? How do you address that while still serving small customers well? I personally think we do a great job of it. We're still seeing really powerful representation and excitement from our core customers that just want to start and run and grow their business. Ultimately, though, serving much larger sellers, like, we're addressing different questions for them. And so are we a relatively new entrant to the enterprise space? I would say over the past 5 or so years, yes. But we're seeing it happen, and that is a powerful reminder that like we can serve many jobs. I recognize that I've also been asked to like not talk about our product that much, but I can't help it. I'm so excited about it. So you can tell that it'll be difficult for me not to share examples. But one thing that I think is really powerful is like that. I don't think it isolates our original customer base because the DNA is the same. So one example is, right, we can serve a micro merchant at a farmer's market and someone who's selling apples or farm fresh peaches or whatever it is, and they're taking payments from their phone seamlessly, and it's available in their account immediately. Then you map that over to like a massive stadium. And that you can take payments in the stand immediately. You can take payments at the point of sale. You can order ahead. You can pick up over there, and all of that information is synced completely and immediately. And so like that's the same DNA right there. It's the same heart of the product. It's just mapped to a different use case and a different scale. And so we're lucky enough to have this like powerful DNA that allows us to expand to different markets, industries, and sizes, which is why I'm so passionate about this. I think if you start with the right approach, your growth trajectory and your growth plans won't be quite as challenging. All right, I'm going to look at some of these other questions here. There's a really great question here. How would you suggest early stage founders to approach sales and start talking to potential customers? I recently founded a startup to help people increase success and develop skills such as emotional intelligence and communication via content, community, coaching, and AI insights. This really touches upon that comment that I made in the presentation itself about the importance of solutions. On a personal note, I have been a salesperson for as long as I have because I don't think of myself as a salesperson. I think of myself as a problem solver. And so having my personal journey is I became a salesperson during the financial crisis. And it's absolutely the best possible education you can have because it really forces you to listen. People are emotional. There's a powerful need for empathy and problem solving. Right? Like if you feature dump or product dump on your customers, you will not win. You're missing the point entirely. And so I think my guidance to any product is to really understand the why and what is the struggle, and to really connect with that before you're trying to match any of that with a solution. So for us all, every person in this audience to be lifelong problem solvers, I feel like that's the goal. All right, I'm going to keep flipping through some of these questions here. There's a good one on how does Square know which customers to add sales reps and other professionals to? And what's the line between self-service and sales driven? I was in a conversation yesterday about sort of product-led acquisition versus sales-led acquisition. And I'm speaking off the cuff here, but like, I don't think that they should be so different. I think of it as a funnel network and not of individual buckets standing out in the rain, waiting to catch rain. Like, I think that's a dangerous dichotomy to think about because ultimately you don't want to waste $1, right? You don't want a drop of rain to hit the ground. And so I won't speak to how Square thinks about which customers to add sales reps and which ones to think about sort of self-service and sales driven. But you could, some of the ways to think about it that I advise others on is complexity. By complexity, it's actually largely a function of like how many steps does it require to get fully onboarded? Like, what does that look like? And you could put sort of triggers along the way that if a customer doesn't trip this trigger, like if they don't create if they don't like migrate all their inventory over, or they don't set up an employee or whatever, like whatever that trigger is, then it might trigger a human outreach, or at the very least, automated outreach, and then finally human touch. So what should have been binary, right? There's a self-service channel, and then there's a sort of talk to sales channel. They start to touch a little bit, and that way you don't waste the dollar that you spent to get someone to sign up, but not start on your product. And I feel very passionately about it because I think that ultimately creates the greatest value over time for the customer. It's like they thought they were just like, I'm just going to sign up for this thing. But at some point they're like, I need help. Or they said to themselves, I need help. I'm not going to bother with getting help. I'm just going to leave this. I don't have time for this right now. Time is money, and I don't have that. I don't have that. And so ultimately, it's about creating the most ideal customer experience. What would they like, even if they're not saying it? So that's the way I personally think about it, and how I advise other companies on it. How is the, oh, I like this one. It's from Isaiah Miguel. How's the interaction between product and sales/marketing? Can you give more examples of rituals, cadences, and shared goals? I sure can. I love this topic. And it's a work in progress for myself. So we'll always be learning and growing from this, but a couple things that I think really work well. One of them is a very regular cadence that is that's part of your sort of annual plan. I would recommend at least twice a year where you have a real deep dive into a very specific use case. I'll give you an example. It could be a super deep dive on where are the seams of your partner integrations. Like what does that look like? What are customers telling us? Similarly, another example is what are the seams between your products? Or what is working well for a small business that's not working well for a mid-market size business? And what are we hearing, and what are they telling us? So one is the structure of that feedback, and it helps to have focus. If you want to like just drown in a product experience, like you could spend weeks on that. So it helps to have one focus at each round, whether it's quarterly or semi-annually. The second thing that I would strongly recommend is make sure that your sales team has tools in which they can share information about their insights. We use a conversational intelligence tool that allows us to track keywords by product. So once you map over, you can say, all right, this product was talked about 1,000 times. Then you can look at when it was talked about with this other feature, or with this competitor name, what was our win rates? And so now you start getting really rich information. And it allows us to not only share data, but we can share the actual voice of the customer along the way. And when you replicate that across sales, account management, and customer support, you now have the beginning of the relationship and the growth of the relationship and even the pain points of the relationship. And that is super powerful. And so that's something I feel very passionately about. And I work very closely with account management and CS to pull these insights regularly and share them with the product teams. Lastly, I think micro cadences are really important too, just to be like, who are we winning? What's the case study? Why did we win? What did they say? You know, what other competitors were in the mix? And it's just important to share why we lose. So we do have sort of micro cadences there as well. But I really like that question, Isaiah, and thank you for asking it. I'm trying to poke around here to see what else we have. How important is being a platform for other vendors for Square? Is it a moat? And what are your top learnings here? I'll keep that short, but I think what's really beautiful about Square personally, I'm biased, but I'm not wrong, is that you can go first party or you can go third party. And I think that's pretty cool. And the power of that in my mind is like, yeah, to answer the question directly, is it a moat? I'll bet yes, because you ultimately want to be able to serve a customer however they want to be served, whatever works best for them. And being able to diversify certain elements in which it can be first party and other elements that can be third party, I think that's pretty powerful. I wish I could speak with you all. It feels strange sort of reading and answering, but I welcome any additional questions that are coming through. how did you go about your go-to-market? This is from Manuel Raj. How did you go about your go-to-market plans when you expanded your target segment, so mid-market to enterprise? And did this also differ when expanding to international markets? Yeah, it's a little nuanced each time, but it's all from a similar playbook if you think about it, right? Like you think about what matters to this customer base, what's different about them. So countries are a good example where like certain countries have different norms. And so you don't want to just read your playbook in a different language when you enter a different country. That's a dangerous plan. But really thinking about like what about our offering matters to that specific audience. And that's what I was referring to before about repackaging. Like, are there different combinations that matter a lot? Are there certain features that like this particular country doesn't care about? Like it's not relevant because they have like a local payment scheme that renders this feature less relevant. That's definitely a thing. And so we took real deep dives. It's not past tense. It's a recurring and constant iteration where we take real deep dives and continually update our understanding of how people want to interact with us. And that's why I think so deeply around like knowing upfront as much as possible what people care about, repackaging it to meet that expectation, and then finally being flexible enough to pivot as necessary. One last question here is from Suzanne. What if the product does require significant modifications to go up market? Do you have suggestions for experiments to validate if we should be going up market? Yeah, that's a tough question, but a really important one, because just because your product requires significant modifications in order to serve a much larger customer, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It just means that you're going in eyes wide open to the amount of work that it's going to take. What I would recommend there, Suzanne, is that you look at what are the jobs. I sound like a broken record. I'm so sorry, but also not sorry. So what are the jobs? And can you serve some of them without much work? And then map out in order what's going to require more work and how much of that business does it capture. Only then, when you have the spectrum, can you see, okay, with this subset of a job, which is the subset of the offering, if we go all in on this first while we build the rest, is this worth it in itself? Like, does it work as a standalone? Assuming that we're not building the rest out quickly. And then you can say, if yes, great. If no, then how quickly do I need to build out the other elements of the product in order to serve this market? And once you have that sort of timeline, that will give you your payback, your ROI. Like that will tell you whether or not it's the right approach. But just because you can't serve the larger customer right out of the box, right out of the gates, doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't, but it does mean that it allows you, it forces you rather, to really think about what's necessary as a path and whether or not that path is funded, whether the timeline matches sort of the customer acquisition life cycle, all of those things. Okay, I think those are all the questions that I can see. Am I missing any?
I think you got them all. We're literally right at time. So perfect timing. You navigated that beautifully. So thank you so much. Ashley, this has been great. I loved all the questions and I'm so glad you were able to get to so many. So realize the virtual setup isn't as conducive, but I think attendees
Next
will
time.
really appreciate you giving us access to your experience and expertise and just being able to fire away any questions at you. So thank you so much again. Remember, this recording will be available on SaaStr's YouTube channel, and hope you tune in to other sessions at SaaStr Money. We have a couple other on the agenda going on right now. Ashley, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having me.